Hi guys, welcome back to the Improvement Season podcast. It is me, Steve Hall, on the other end, Pascal Floor. How are things going, Pascal? I don't have a good intro this time.
Yeah, we've been just talking off air about kind of me having my first physio session. And Steve and I, we both are on the same page here when it comes to still being skeptical when it comes to physiotherapy and how much it actually does to you. Because every single time I'm leaving kind of that clinic, now this time it's the first time, to be fair, right? But every single time I'm just leaving, and whenever they ask me like, is it feeling better? I'm just like, to be honest, nothing has really changed. And then we even further continue talking about people asking you, Steve, aren't you ever doing any kind of sports massage? And I was to a Thai massage place, and same question at the end of the session where they asked me like, are you feeling great? And I was just like,
do you want a happy ending?
No, that's not the Thai place that I went to.
That would have made it all worthwhile.
No, it would have made things much worse. And they're asking, and just out of politeness, you say, of course, like, yeah, it was fine and it was great. It's the same when you go to a restaurant when they ask you, was the dish all right? You never say like, it was utter bullshit. It was the worst experience that I ever had. No, out of politeness, most of the time you say like, it was good. Something like this. You wrap it a little bit in a more polite fashion. And it's kind of the same here. And sorry to say this goes out to Mike Chalice, but I think that he's very, very much aware that I'm skeptical of the entire thing. And there are certainly, of course, things where it's probably much more beneficial. But every single time that I'm going in there, I never really have the feeling that it does something for me. Doesn't mean, though, that it doesn't do anything for me. It's just that I don't feel any different.
Yeah, it's funny. I as we're talking about being skeptical of physios, I was like, Mike's not going to be happy about this. But I would say the quality of physio definitely makes a difference. But because I remember having issues, and I had a consultation online with Quinn Hennock ages ago, which I think you have too. And obviously he's a very well-renowned physio, and he definitely helped me much more than the in-person physios that I'd seen. And I don't know if part of that is just like the trust of that individual. I don't know. I wonder how much is that. But I know having Mike in my corner to communicate to, sometimes if I get some issues, and just tell him, and he'll give me some like general feedback, just having that from someone I trust who's knowledgeable, it definitely helps. But yeah, when I've seen in-person physios like you saw, who I don't know anything about them, they get me to go through a bunch of different things, I'm just like, I feel like that didn't really do much. It was just time that led to me healing up overall.
Yeah, and I would love to have someone like Mike by my side, or someone like Quinn, that I then am able to see on a more regular basis, instead of just like here in Germany, of course, from a recipe prescription that you're then receiving, you only get like 6 sessions. And if that needs to be any longer than this, then you need to reapply, whether you then extend the physiotherapy sessions. And it's kind of like a little bit of pain in the ass, and then it's only 6 sessions. How much does 6 sessions actually then do for you? Also, they're questionable. You probably need to do a lot by yourself of the things that they are then telling you in the session, I would very much assume, right? And the person that I'm seeing is actually kind of, I would even say, one of the first very competent people. I had one other person that I saw in the past. No, 2 other person. When I still worked in the CrossFit box, Stefan, he was actually also a very, very good one. But he's too far away right now. And also the other one, he treated me like a couple of years back. He's also now way too far away for me to travel there. And that is, of course, an unfortunate thing. But those people, funny enough, the second one that I've just mentioned, I saw him at even a seminar from Danny Lennon back like two years ago here in Berlin. I then met him another time, and this just tells you how kind of in the trenches he is, and that he's probably also a credible resource. At least for me personally, it creates a lot of trust in who he is, what he's actually looking into, how he stays up to date with the latest research and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement. And I think it also helps when you're physio, because physio is broad, and the number of people they see must be so varied. Whereas when you have someone like Quinn or Mike Chalice, or potentially your guys too, who are in the CrossFit box, like they're seeing people that lift.
Yes.
So they kind of know the type of injuries that tend to occur with that. And so they have better experience of how to solve those issues. So I must say, Mike has at times just given me like you said, homework, like some stretches to do at home. Some of them don't feel like they do too much, but others I'm like, oh, that one really felt like it just opened me up, did exactly what I needed.
Maybe
it's nice to have that specific resource.
Maybe it's very much the same as with coaching in general. You can be the greatest coach, right? Giving out the greatest information. And if the client doesn't really go out and apply it, all that information is kind of redundant anyway to begin with. All of those recommendations are worthless overall. It's kind of like nutritional recommendations, right? Go out there, you're overeating, do X, Y, Z, and then it's probably better, or you're not seeing the progress that you would like, then do those things and we will probably see a much better progress. And if you don't, then of course you can't really expect any kind of progression there. And it's probably the same when it comes to injuries, injury progression. If you're not doing your due diligence and continue working at home on those issues, then very unlikely it's going to change with the 20 or 30 minutes that you're then spending at the physiotherapist for like 6 times.
Yeah. Yeah, but it to bring it back to massage, it's really interesting to me because I don't know. I'm just not convinced that it's doing all that much. Like similar to you, when I've gone for massages and things like this, I almost don't even find them relaxing. They almost like, I don't know, kind of stress me out somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But there's so many, like you look at, I don't know, Chris Bumstead or like these IFBB guys, obviously they just invest everything and anything into anything that could help them in any shape or form. They're doing ice baths, and actually I suppose those could even be negative, right? But they're doing cupping and all these, like they have their tape on them, like to, don't know, whatever that tape is meant to be doing, you know, that kinesiology tape or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you're just like, and I think this just all then filters down to like Gen Pop or like natural bodybuilders who then just, they look up to these people and are just like, oh, anything that person's doing because they've got so much muscle mass and, you know, they're winning, they're a pro, whatever it is, that must mean it must be good for me too. So clearly I would be doing it. But yeah, I'm not sure that's the case.
It's funny though, because I have one credible resource who has very tight connections to a professional soccer team or football team rather. And he said the people who are working there most of the time, you would be baffled that they are in a position like this, dealing with players who are worth millions, multi-millions. They are treating them with absolutely horrendous, unscientific approaches and all that kind of stuff. And this is, of course, only from that one team, but I would very much assume that this is a common phenomenon.
Yeah, it makes me think of, I don't know, just like people in power, right? Like you look at politics and the people that get to the top, it's just like, how do they get there? And quite often it's just fortune of their connections or who their parents were. Not always, but obviously. But it's and then this leads to governments that are like maybe not that great. And similar here, it's just like, how did these people get into their positions of power? Was it through their education or knowledge, or was it through? And I'm not sure. Like it just sounds like these people it wasn't education and knowledge.
There's even a terminology for that, Steve. I think it's a new terminology. I can't really recall what it's like. It has to do, it mostly stemmed from the celebrities from the US, especially actors. That many of the kids were are kids from formerly known actors or actress. And the same goes for sports kids as well. And most of the time, they're getting into it and getting kind of to that level due to then the connections their parents had. Now, that's not to say that they don't have any kind of talent. It can very well be, but as already discussed that one time, Steve, the longer you've been doing something for, the higher the likelihood that you are successful in that field, based on also then the novel, or not the novel, the book from what's it called again? Outliers.
Oh yes,
Malcolm Gladwell.
Yes.
Where he's analyzing that time, if time is on your side, you have a much higher likelihood of success. And then couple that with proper connections, it's not a level playing field. If you were born kind of, I don't know, in a country without any kind of connections, where rising to the top is much, much harder, then you can be as talented as you want to be. It's very unlikely that you are then ending at the top where then other people are. And here in Germany, we call it Vetternwirtschaft. So when you have like proper connections, it's much more likely that you are rising to the top much faster, much quicker, and with a much higher likelihood than someone who's not coming from such favorable positions or starting positions.
Yeah, I think it's just an unfortunate consequence of life, right?
Yeah.
That kind of just is what it is. Where do we go from here? How?
That's a good question, Steve.
How is your injury holding up then? Are you still following the same sort of split that's kind of built around it?
Yeah, I do. Simply because it's also psychologically very much of a relief. Because that setup is actually fun, like doing quads push and then hamstrings pull and then arms and shoulders. Because that arms and shoulders day, you can really train hard, but it's never really psychologically demanding, and also physically. So systemically speaking, it's never really super demanding either. So it feels like an additional rest day, even though that it isn't. Simply because the arms and the shoulders, they do recover that quickly. On that day, specifically, just to mention that, I'm also doing calves and abs. But as we know, those things don't really wreck you completely, systemically speaking. So it always feels, mentally speaking, when I'm approaching that day in the gym, like a rest day, when in reality it isn't. So then in total, you have it feels like you have more rest days throughout the week, even though that you're still ending up with 6 training sessions. And that's amazing, to be honest.
I can easily understand that, because it's almost like the difference between just upper body and lower body days. Like upper body days always feel a bit more like a rest day versus a lower body day. I even had it this morning. I was like, oh yeah, what am I training to? Oh, it's upper. Oh, nice. I was just like, oh, okay, a bit of relief. Like that's an easier session to get through.
And now, lowering that level of entry, so to speak, a little bit more even, getting it to the point where you just feel like, oh, I'm training, but I'm not training, but I'm still providing a stimulus. It's great, honestly. And this is why I just said, like, okay, let's continue with that for a little bit longer, because it just suits me right now, and it fits my lifestyle for the time being. And that's why I just wanted to continue with that.
This might be a bit of a discussion point for us. Ab training, obviously for us both, neither of us blessed with Matt August style abs that are like, or Ryan Terry, someone else with really nice abs. And obviously they worked for those, but also had predisposed genetics to have a really nice set of abdominals. For ab training for yourself, like, it's one of those things where I do it, but I think it's in a position right now where my calves used to be, where I would do my calf training, but I never really felt like I was getting what I should get from calves, like in terms of stimulus, feedback, like pumps, some disruption, feeling like I'm actually getting contractions within like the deep muscle bellies. Whereas calf training now feels very productive. I do it and I'm like, yeah, like that feels like growth is happening. Abs, I'm still in this position where I'm like, like I do 4 sets and I'm just like, man, after 4 sets of anything where I'm isolating a muscle, I feel like I should feel like that muscle has really had a good go and I'm training close to failure, or if not failure. And I'm just like, abs I just always leave abs being like, eh. And then I see other people, they get like ab cramps, like where they're like, they like, don't know, have their top off and they show the ab cramp and it's just like this huge like contraction going on. I'm just, I've never had anything close to an ab cramp. So I don't know how it is for you.
So for me personally, whenever I'm going into a set, in the set, it feels actually quite great. Where in the past, I was always having issues also with the mind-muscle connection there. I guess it's something that we've discussed in the past, that maybe from a neurological perspective, I wasn't as advanced to then really target and isolate the abs to the highest extent. And right now, I'm actually having a great time with that. That being said, though, once I'm ending the set, it then kind of burns, in quotation marks, for like a continued time of like 5 seconds or so. And then it's kind of back to normal again. So in the set itself, I'm exhausting it very nicely. I'm targeting the muscles very nicely as well. And then shortly after, it's kind of like, all right, that was it. It feels like I could go on for indefinitely, which isn't the case, because once I'm starting the next set, my fatigue kicks in and the rep count drops significantly as well. That being said, though, I've never, in the past, I've never really done kind of hanging leg raises, because I always thought that this is one of those movements that is commonly butchered, right? Because most of the people don't really train the abs and do the flexion at the abs. And I think that there are better alternatives than this. I just here a couple of days ago, I've just tried it out of curiosity, right? And I'm so piss poor at that, Steve, in having straight legs and really just flexing at the abs instead of kind of using some momentum, flexing at the hips and all. And it is much, much harder than I anticipated. And I thought, like, man, I have piss poor abs, or piss poor weak abs, and that's probably why I have piss poor abs. And maybe I need to work a little bit more on the strength aspect. But once again, something like weighted cable crunches or so, something that I can do quite easily, but more so than the lower portion of the abs maybe is just a very weak spot for me.
Yeah, I'm the same with you, actually, where I've definitely got better at understanding the anatomy, or, well, not understanding it, just actually taking a moment to reflect upon when I'm trying to move origin away from insertion. This is literally spinal extension and kind of flexion, and focusing on that. So during sets, I'm much better at targeting the abs. But like you, I just don't, and very rare do I get sore, maybe if it's very novel. And not that soreness, I think, is a big deal. I actually rarely get sore in muscle groups as a standalone now. Like, it just doesn't happen to me that much. I really don't put much stock in needing to get sore, much less than I ever used to. But yeah, it's similar. I don't have this sense of that muscle was really hard trained, like hours after the session or the next day necessarily. And it's kind of frustrating. And I also find it can sometimes be a bit hit and miss. Like, an exercise can feel really good for a period of time, and then suddenly it just starts feeling like, oh, I'm not really getting what I used to from it. It's like I adapt quickly to it, but I don't think it is that. It's frustrating, because some muscles I just find, like for me, I think some people have this with like biceps, for example. Like, I can do a set of biceps, I'm just like, my bicep feels like it's going to hang off the bone. Like, it's just something that responds really easy. I find super easy to connect to. It's just kind of ridiculous. But yeah, for me, abs is one of those where it's like, I could try so many things. I'm just like, nothing quite feels like it. And I think there's also, it's like you said, hanging leg raises, they're easy to butcher. And also, it's just not many machines are built very well to isolate the abs well and also train them in a stretch. Like, hanging leg raises, I believe, are hardest as you're contracting versus like when you're fully stretched. Like, there's no load at that stretch position.
So it would probably be a
feels.
better idea to do them lying rather.
Yeah, lying, or like on I think Mike Chalice has done them before. Like, you're on lying, sorry, like off a bench or something where you can like really get into that stretch and weighted stretch. But yeah, anyway, it's easy for the hip flexors to take over. On so many ab movements, the thing. Even if you try not to.
But you brought up a good point. I think that there are very few machines that are properly made for the abs, especially because it is so dependent on the height of your torso as well, where then kind of the flexion point of the machine is, and most of the machines aren't versatile enough so that you can modify it to your build. And that is something that you can already see with other movements and other body parts, right? But it becomes especially apparent on something like ab machines, in my personal experience, because your entire body is kind of in that position. And I find them always to be very, very poor, the machines. I always find a much better kind of stimulus, or getting a much better stimulus, even from normal kind of crunches, rather than doing or using kind of the machine.
And at the moment, I'm doing off the back of a back extension, I'm kind of like lying back and doing like an unsupported crunch, which are good, but then I do those. And I was actually just saying this to one of my clients, Tim, who trains in the same gym as me. When I get up to finish a set, I get like a horrible pain in my head, because it's like the blood is like rushing to it or something. And I'm like, I don't know if I can keep doing these if I'm going to get that. Like, that pain does not feel, it's not a good pain. It's a bad pain. I just find, for me, ab training is the most frustrating, like, muscle that we commonly train. Just
sorry to hear that. But also on the note of, like, some movements just at some point don't really feel great anymore. There are, of course, certain movements that where you're getting to that point much, much faster than on others. But for me personally, it's something like dips, for example. Whenever you introduce dips, they feel actually quite great. And then shortly after, it just doesn't feel great anymore. And this happened to me quite often already over the time frame of my lifting career.
Do you find the same with pull-ups?
Yeah, to some extent. They
only because that's happened to me recently.
Yeah. In the beginning, it always feels amazing, and then shortly after, it's just like, I wouldn't even say that they are feeling stale. It just doesn't really feel as productive as the first attempts that you had.
Yeah. Just flip the script a little bit. Are you dieting now? Or, because I know you said you were considering a diet leading into
I considered starting in the middle of June, so after my next tattoo appointment, so that I have this off the table, and then I can actually start going or getting into the summertime when there's also another wedding coming up in August. It's not our wedding, not for the third time then, but a friend of ours. I don't want to fit into my suit, but funny enough, I was actually trying on my suit here on the last weekend, and it still fits a little bit more snug, but it's still reasonable, right? Reasonable. And this is also going back to what it is that we've figured out for ourselves, is that your body composition will probably not change too drastically if you're not too aggressive with those cutting and gaining phases, especially like as natural athletes. It's probably the best proof that you're a natural, that you can still fit into the same clothes, that they are still fitting you to some extent, not that you've outgrown it due to muscle mass, but you can still fit into those even after, like in my case, after a year.
Yeah, I think, if you're outgrowing it, you've been training for 10 years, you outgrow it in a year, I'd be like, you've either got fat or, probably
you're
not.
Exactly. That's the proof. That's the proof.
Or you just buy everything oversized like I do. So I think I'm going to fit into mine. I'll more and more look like a child as I lose weight. But it's actually quite nice, this prep round. Like the clothes that I would wear normally still, I suppose because I don't get that far above stage weight. So like 20 pounds above stage weight, of course, dropping 20 pounds when it's mostly fat, it's probably just around the waist, like a lot around the waist and stuff. So yeah, I'm not like looking like a child too much in the clothes I'm wearing, but finally getting into that zone of territory where people look at me and they're like, you're going to compete, aren't you?
Nice. I'm actually looking forward to cutting again, because it has been a pretty long time by then. Like last year, of course, for then the wedding. And then from the beginning, from the moment that I'm starting, it's kind of then a year ago. And I'm actually looking forward to that, because I sometimes find myself at the end of the day, I'm left with calories. And this is quite baffling with the amount of calories that I'm consuming. And then I always opt, of course, for the more palatable things to get the calories in, because I don't really want to end up being in a caloric deficit if I don't have to. I'm not as anal anymore about then reaching that caloric target, but I still want to make sure that I'm at least not ending up in a deficit and always flip-flopping around of like, oh, one day I underate just because I wasn't really on point with things or not really behind what it is that I was supposed to be doing. And that's why there's always an easy way of getting calories in by the end of the day. And what the thing that I'm doing and I've incorporated is always having a package of nuts at home, because it's so easy to consume nuts and to get some calories in. And also you can make...
Salted and roasted?
Oh, salted, yeah. Man, it's so good. So good.
If they're not salted and roasted and they're just nuts, it's like...
But what is it about this, Steve? It's crazy how much the taste is different than afterwards. Like especially
it's
almonds.
like adding salt to your whey shake. It just makes it.
Especially almonds, where it's like unroasted and unsalted, they taste completely different. completely different.
Bit cardboard.
Yeah. And having them roasted and also salted is just a complete game changer. Here it is. But I also do believe that if you then opt for something like nuts, you can at least also there argue that it's probably a good source that you are then kind of getting some calories in. Because I could always opt for then something like what I've just recently said, something like a Snickers bar or anything I like.
Nuts.
But, right? Yeah, sure. But I think, and we could, of course, be completely wrong in that assumption, but I think it's probably then still better, just by my gut feeling, just from a mental kind of perspective, to then have a handful of nuts instead of having the Snickers bar.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what the rest of your day looks like. If
Sure,
the rest
but
of your day
I
is
just mean like
very micronutrient dense. It might not matter
and
too much.
It can still be a complete misconception, and it then turns out in a couple of years that there is no difference between highly processed things in comparison to something like wholesome natural foods. And only because it's wholesome and natural doesn't mean that it's automatically good. I'm very well aware of that, but it's just my current belief that I would very much assume that having that unprocessed natural source in that comparison, not in comparison to something like a Snickers bar, it's just the better option, right? And this is just only gut feeling here right now.
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue against when you're putting foods side by side like that. And then it's the long term. If you're eating 80-90% of your food from micronutrient dense, less processed foods, and you like identically follow the same macros and calories, and one person is eating nuts versus a Snickers bar, long term, does that make a difference? That's what I'd be interested in, because I think most of the time the issue with highly processed foods is it just leads people to overeat. That seems to really be the issue, isn't the food in for itself. And in fact, some processing is really good. And whey protein, for example, whey protein powder, super highly processed, right? But actually it's a very high quality protein, and it could really help people meeting their protein targets and goals. So yeah, it's a whole can of worms, isn't it?
Yeah, and maybe you want to look at it from a different perspective of not like what's worse, but more so turn it around and be like what's better in that instance. Because in the end, it's probably like the outcome from a negative perspective may even be the same, but can it be better from a positive perspective?
Yeah, it's interesting actually. Context is so interesting because this is a good segue to an update too. So I update with Cliff on Mondays, as I always say, give my Monday win, tell him how things are going. And his update often comes back to me quite late on a Monday because he's obviously behind in the US. It came through at like 7 p.m. or something. So I hadn't had dinner yet. And on Mondays, I always leave my dinner a little bit more open in case he's going to reduce food. But this time, he's actually given me a diet break. So this week, I'm diet breaking. Oh, right. So he increased my food. And I was like, oh, that's going to be quite a big dinner if I'm going to meet those targets. And so if I went for like more of the micronutrient dense foods, like more oats, more veggies, more like an apple, things that I could certainly have done, I would have had tons of fiber and lots of food volume. And I think my sleep would have been significantly impacted. But what I did is I immediately went, and we've got, I don't know if you have this in Germany, but it's essentially fizzy apple juice. So it's apple Tizer. Super nice. And we had it in the fridge because Charlotte's been enjoying it. And I had a big glass of apple Tizer, which had 50 grams of carbs or something. So I was just like, easy way to get in a bunch of carbs without it impacting me negatively in terms of sleep and stuff. And then I basically had the same sort of meal as I would have planned, like eggs, oats. I had, again, protein oats, as I always do, like a bit of a salad, but I removed cucumber, which I was going to have, and I put in sourdough toast to have on the side. And then I think I included like an Oreo little ice cream, which is 100 calories. And I guess you could argue you could have replaced the Oreo. I was trying to meet macros actually, because I could have had nuts, but then I would have gone over my fats and not had enough carbs or whatever. So anyway, just in that context, I selected something like the apple Tizer, typically fruit juice, highly palatable, highly processed, like not very filling. Not the best choice in many contexts, but in the context of eating a cup of apples versus having the apple Tizer, which would have led to my fiber being high, me feeling bloated, sleeping a bit poorer, the next day not feeling quite as good, because I'd already eaten so much fiber in the day and micronutrients in the day, it was actually a better choice. So it's kind of, I don't know, it was an interesting, just again, highlighting how important context is, and why when I frame, and I think your framing of, in most situations, having some nuts would be better than having a Snickers bar. You can't argue with that. It's just correct.
Yeah, exactly. And also, it's probably the frequency. I think that if you do something like this kind of once, it's probably not having any kind of significant difference. But if that's a consistent approach, where then each and every single day you have that Snickers bar over than the handful of nuts, I just have to believe that then it has more deleterious effects on you than the nuts themselves. And we're maybe not even talking about a significant difference or so, right? It's just, what's the likelihood to have potentially more negative consequences? I have to assume that based on certain literature that is out there on processed foods, that is more like the processed food. I think that you have a lesser likelihood that anything bad comes out of eating a handful of nuts or so, in comparison to something like this. Right? And it's just, of course, it's up for speculation, and you can very much try it, right? And I'm not blaming the people who are then opting for then the Snickers bar, but what I've also found to be the case is those people who tend to opt for the Snickers bar on a regular basis are most of the time also the people who are most likely to then struggle with nutrition in general.
Yeah, and it comes back to, what does the diet as a whole look like? And typically not the best if you're consistently having something like that.
Exactly, and the Snickers bar, in our example now, may only be the tip of the iceberg, and also the symbol and kind of the meaning of the entire diet in itself, of how that person is treating themselves, what kind of foods they are more so opting for in general, and that it's not just that one particular 200 calories or so, but it is a common phenomenon that is kind of dragging itself through the entire day, the entire weeks, the entire months, and maybe even the entire life.
Yeah, it makes me think of those studies that have looked at like vegan diets and how often the vegan individuals are more healthy, but it's not necessarily because they're specifically vegan. It's more associated with vegans are generally more healthy individuals. Or I can't remember, there's another example of, maybe it's some of the more processed red meats, and it's where like a lot of people that eat those are also smokers. And it's like, okay, so there's some confounders in here. It's like, how can we best draw the bigger picture here? So yeah, I think it's, where possible, focus on like micronutrient, low processing of foods.
Yeah. And once again, to draw it back, right, one more time, if I'm opting for them the nuts at the end of the day, I know that it doesn't really have any kind of detrimental impacts on me. But unless I have a nut allergy, of course, that is. But then the Snickers bar is probably also fucked as well.
yeah,
but because I know this, right? And the other one, I'm not 100% certain that it may not have some kind of effects on me. That's why I can then definitely, with 100% certainty, go for the nuts. And if I then ever fancy something like a Snickers bar, I can still incorporate that.
So your position is, you think there is some potential inherent harm that a processed food could have on you, despite in the context of an overwhelmingly micronutrient dense diet? I'm just pinpointing your position.
Yeah.
Because my position is I'm very skeptical that it could. But again, it's so hard to isolate that question.
Yeah, that's why I struggle to give a definite answer on it, because I don't know whether I'm fully convinced of it myself. But it's more of a question of like, okay, the one of them, I'm not certain, right? And as long as I'm not 100% certain of this, would I really then go down that route when I have the other alternative where I can be quite certain that it doesn't have any kind of negative impact on me? You know where I'm coming from?
Yeah, because I'm just trying to extend it. So I could extend it to like artificial sweeteners, because you could say never eat any artificial sweeteners because water, just have water, because water, 100%, no harm so long as I don't overdo it. I'm not going to cause a problem. Then, but Diet Coke with aspartame in and sweeteners, hey, like there are some potential risks involved with that. There's been some research to show it within rats or whatever, right? Then you could like extend this kind of equation to many aspects.
That's a form of stigmatization and also a straw man argument that you're then building and creating. If like, okay, so what you're saying now is X, Y, Z, right? And you're drawing up a completely different example with in a different context or so, right? And sure, you can then always bring up all the other arguments of like, I don't know, for example, when it comes to driving an electric vehicle or something like this, right? We have much more data on fuel. What is it called again? On normal fossil fuel driven cars than we have over electric cars, and then you can also there make an argument of like, don't you think that driving then a fossil fuel is still a valid option if we don't really have evidence that supports that electric vehicles are better for climate, for example, right? So you can turn it and twist it into other avenues as well. And I think that's not a fair assessment and comparison of what it is that I'm trying to say. It's just in that context. And there are, of course, when you then draw a conclusion between Snickers bar and a different kind of wholesome food, the situation and the context may look quite different, and my answer would also look quite different, right? But in an instance like this, in a situation like this, I think that one, I can probably say with 100% certainty that it has some, at least not harmful effects on me when I'm opting for the nuts. And also the other one, I'm not 100% certain. And then I have to make the decision myself of whether I want to go down the other route of the potential consequences that may be present are worth it to me or not. And in most instances on a day-to-day basis, I think that going with the safer option is probably a best bet. But of course, opting then for the other one, if you can't really say that the risks are very much elevated, you can still go down there, but I wouldn't really go down on a constant basis. It's kind of like also drugs or so, right? If you're consuming drugs, I think if you do it once, twice, mate, or smoking even, I don't think that there is anything harmful, right? Even though that we know that it has some deleterious effects on your health, right? And even then, making the conscious decision of maybe smoking it because you want to try it, sure, be my guest of doing that. Would I recommend doing it like regularly? No.
Yeah, I think the reason I used like an aspartame or artificial sweetener is because we have research showing that in the quantities that humans would consume, there doesn't seem to be deleterious effects. And so I think the same can be applied to processed food, where you have studies looking at like individuals who have had, I don't know, the Twinkies diet guy or whatever it is, like they consume, or the guy that ate, like, I don't know, there's various studies that have shown people consuming some of these highly processed foods within their diet, but so long as the diet as a whole is wholesome, minimally processed, all that good stuff, there are no deleterious outcomes. So I was kind of using it from that angle of like, the dose makes the poison. And so
100%.
If it's like a tiny portion of your diet, like, is it going to have deleterious effects? I'm very skeptical that it would. Is it going to have positive effects? I mean, if it just meets your calorie demands, I guess that could be one. But yeah, the nuts are more likely to have a positive effect, I would say. But I'm skeptical that once you're already, like, once you've got your 5 gold stars or whatever for micronutrients for the diet, having more on top of that, like, you could maybe pick or choose what is to a preference to a certain extent. Like that 80-20 rule, I think 100%. Does apply. Well.
Of course, and it's always then individual dependent. I mean, someone like you, Steve, who's then consuming 4,000 calories, I think it's much of a lesser evil to then have something like this in your diet in comparison to someone who's only consuming 2,000 calories or so, because it makes up a much bigger portion of their total amount of calories. And by that alone, it has a much bigger impact from a relative perspective that then could end up harming you. And I'm not saying harming in the sense of like that you are then, I don't know, losing a limb, or that you're developing something inside your body or anything alike, right? It's just that we can be quite certain that one has probably some quite positive impacts on your health. It's the same when it comes to olive oil, for example, in comparison to something like seed oil also, right? Or sunflower oil when you're cooking it also, right? We have scientific evidence that supports that olive oil is actually a very, very good resource when it comes to fatty acid sources. Whereas the other one, it doesn't kill you or anything alike. But if you know that the other one has such positive implications on your overall well-being and health, why would you then opt on a consistent basis for then the other one? You know, this is more so where I'm coming from. I never really think that opting for some of the, let's say the hyper-processed things on an infrequent basis has any kind of detrimental outcomes to your health, especially when it makes up such a low amount of your relative total amount of calories and micronutrients for the day. It's probably even less likely to have deleterious effects on you. But if it makes a bigger portion up from a total magnitude perspective, so not just on a daily basis in terms of your calories, but over the time span of like 5-10 years or so, I could very much assume, and this is just pure speculation from my end, right? It's an assumption that I would assume that it's probably most likely leading to less positive outcomes in terms of health, but it could also well be that it has more so to do with your demographic in general and the way that you are as a person in general. So how you treat your body, such as the study that you've quoted about kind of vegans tempting to have better choices surrounding the body when it comes to, I don't know, being more active, being more likely to not be a smoker and all that kind of stuff, right? And this kind of muddies the water to some extent.
Yeah, I think the main, I think we're pretty much on the same page with it, to be honest. It's like the magnitude is a great way of putting it. Like what percentage as a whole does certain food make up of your diet? You don't want it to be a huge amount. And to be honest, absolutely most people, even most people I end up working with, probably could do with having less of that, especially when I check over the ones who struggle. I check over their food diary and I'm like, like this is not how I would say healthy eating should look like.
And that's also one of the by-effects of what it is that we've talked about. It's not necessarily the food itself that is then maybe leading to more deleterious health outcomes, but maybe then the after effects and all the other things that are implied in making that food choice. Because if you then take that, it's more likely that it's not the only time that you're then opting for that food. It's happening more regularly, and it then causes maybe some other stressful impact on your body. As you rightly put so yourself, when people are dieting, most of the time they are failing because they are picking and choosing the wrong foods at the wrong time. It's not because the Snickers is a bad food necessarily, but in that context, it is probably not the best to consume.
Yeah, and I always come back to the dose makes the poison as well. I do feel it's very rare for a food to have like inherent bad health consequences. It is the amount of it that you consume, because it's hard to argue that otherwise, and so it's making sure that you're moderating it correctly, however that looks for you in your individual context completely. I feel like we should have had an ad break by now. I was like looking at the time, I was like, oh no, we're extending this discussion.
Maybe it's too late already. Let's try.
Oh no.
Let's try. I'm now announcing it that we are throwing in an ad break, but if it isn't here, then it's because it's too late already. Do you not see the progress you would like? Are you sick of writing your own programs? Or perhaps you need some accountability in order to stick with a plan? Then it's time to start working with us. We at Revive Stronger offer a truly personalized coaching service. You'll get more than just an email with some macros or random cookie cutter program. With Revive Stronger, you will be the center of our attention. You will receive your own fully individualized training protocol alongside a customized nutritional strategy. We created the coaching around your needs, wants, personal preferences, and your own unique lifestyle. Every single week, we delve into your program in order to make appropriate adjustments so that we
get the most out of your time and the best possible outcome. We help both female and male athletes to seriously change their body composition by adding more muscle mass and decreasing fat tissue. No matter if you're a competitive bodybuilder or just want to look better, if you need help with your progress and taking your physique to the next level, our coaching is for you. It's time to make a change. Sign up today and let's revive stronger.
Where should we go from here, Steve, though?
Oh, so yeah, the diet break. So yeah, it's funny when
right.
This is how we kind of got here, I think, or part of the discussion. So as an update on me, so I think I had, like last time I said I had like the weekend off, had like 3 days off training, got back into things. It's surprising how just 3 days off can just, I was training for just over 8 weeks. 3 days off just gave me a whole lot of recovery, which is really nice. And also backing off a little bit on volume, reducing a set here or there, just because I always find that I don't quite need as much when I initially start a program or a mesocycle. And then a few exercise rotations. So I'd been running like the iliac lat pull around for freaking months and months and months. So I was like, man, I don't want to do like a neutral grip pull down, a single arm pull down. I'd done those relatively recently. I was like, I'm just going to go back to a standard lat pull down, your traditional, the straight bar that everyone seemed to hate against for lats, you know, so an upper back pull down. And obviously we were still of the contention that it depends how you perform the exercise. And it felt so good. It was really nice to just get back into that movement and just get back into some, more basic movements. I removed my lengthened partials that I was doing on some of my pressing, and I just went to like very like soft lockouts. I allowed myself to get into that short position a bit more. So a few like, I guess, rotations of exercise and reducing things a little bit and feeling a bit fresher in training felt so good.
Steve,
I'm always surprised of that.
Because now you're throwing in lat pull downs, and I think it's, for me personally, a great example that when I'm coming to the shortened position and I'm really squeezing it here, it always feels ultra productive. And another example would be something like dumbbell lateral raises, or even lateral raises in general when I'm coming up here. And I'm really intentionally not just going to this, but squeezing up. And I've seen your recent post surrounding the, I think, cable laterals, where you then also even commented that you've been just doing the lengthened partials since a long time. What's your take on this? Because also here, just from a gut sensation and the way that I'm perceiving things, I have the feeling that especially the last portion is highly productive for me, right? Because it stands in stark contrast to now the recent evidence supporting lengthened partials, because especially in the last bit of that movement, lat pull downs, for example, especially when I have a wider grip pronated, and then dumbbell lateral raises. What's your take on this? Because it stands in such a stark contrast to then the recent evidence that supports lengthened partials.
Yeah.
And what do you make of it?
So for the standard grip pull down, do you mean coming down to like your chest and squeezing down there?
Yes.
So that real short. Okay.
Yes.
Interesting. Yeah. I always felt like, actually, it's been a while since I've done that, but I know when I used to do full ROM, I would, on the last reps for any pulling, would start introducing momentum to get it short, because I felt like I had more in the tank, which I did in the lengthened position, but not in the short. So I'd have to use momentum to kind of drive it short. So for me, when I removed that short position, it just felt like a bit of a refinement, where I'd now no longer had to have that momentum to drive it short, and I could just focus on like the money portion of the range of motion. And I feel the same with lateral raises, where if I just skip, especially if you bias the lengthened position with a cable at hand height and you really make it lengthened biased, when I come all the way up to the top, I just feel like that's it. The load drops off so much, and then it becomes so easy. It's just kind of like a pointless ROM that I don't need to worry about. But are you talking about dumbbell lateral raises?
For example, but also cable, where then the tension is still at its highest, because when you're now moving up all the way up to here, I have the feeling that you're losing a lot of the tension. Maybe even with dumbbell lateral raises, I was never capable of doing full range of motion dumbbell lateral raises due to my shoulder mobility. But once I'm coming up here, right, that little bit extra up here, and squeezing it up here, it just feels incredible. And the same goes lat pull downs, pronated ones, right, coming down. Once I'm about here, right, and this is kind of nearly chest height, I'm able and capable of really contracting my musculature, and it just adds that little bit of extra kind of productiveness, at least from a feeling perspective. And I can't really explain it any differently, but to me personally, it would just feel like if I were to skip this or miss out of it, also here from my gut feeling, it would feel wrong because it gives me that biofeedback.
Yeah, it's interesting. I guess the way you're describing it sounds like I get it on the lateral raise in particular because the load drops off a little bit, so you can squeeze there and pause because it's a little bit easier, especially if you bias it lengthened. I get that a bit more with the pull down because it gets harder in that lengthened position. It's kind of hard to squeeze there because you're also weaker. So I don't know, but the real question becomes, would you side with the research currently that supports a certain way of lifting or biofeedback from an individual that supports a current way of lifting? And that's a really divisive one for me because sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I was just going to say,
Sorry.
I really value, especially for someone like yourself, an advanced lifter who knows their body well, I really value that biofeedback. I think it's just invaluable.
It would have been also, and sorry that I wanted to interrupt you there, but that's exactly what I would have said as well. I value my biofeedback more than what the research says on an average basis, on a median basis, on the participants that they had there. And not to kind of poo-poo or sound hypocritical, because I don't really want to make it sound that way of like, okay, it doesn't really support my take this time, and that's why I'm disregarding it. I think that, once again, there's very much inherent value in the scientific literature as of late when it comes to lengthened partials, especially surrounding or getting a little bit more comfortable also in that position, and also seeing the value in certain situations such as limited range of motion due to the past injury or anything like it, right? I think that there's a lot of value in that research, but especially with my own personal experience surrounding those movements, I'm just skeptical of whether we should then cut it short just because the research then indicates that the last portion is not really more hypertrophically stimulating, when I have that biofeedback that tells me something is going on. And I can't really say what it is, right? But it feels productive.
Yeah. So this is great because practically the way I go about it with clients is typically I would start full ROM with them, depending who they are, or I might do full ROM plus partials. So they do like sets at full ROM and then some partials where I think applicable, like a lat pull down. And then I gather feedback from them and be like, so where do you feel the most stimulus, the full ROM or the partials? And then we might decide, hey, let's drop one or the other, or bias more volume to one or the other, because I really value, especially like I said, advanced, well-trained lifters, individual feedback, because that ultimately gives me a little bit more of a better one-on-one case study versus, like you said, the research is looking at a certain population and it gives an average outcome. And we know there's always people at like either end of the spectrum, that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm in agreement with your decision-making.
Yeah, I was just like thinking about it now that you brought up kind of lat pull downs and that you haven't been doing it in that kind of fashion for a very long time. And I also know that many people are now opting for lengthened partials on the lat pull downs. And it seems, once again, as always, that the pendulum has swung completely to the opposite side of like not doing any kind of full range of motion anymore, because the evidence doesn't really support that anymore, where I think that it's too early to really jump the ship and just go the other direction completely.
Yeah, I am definitely in favor of it strongly in some areas, like back. Like I don't do any full ROM for back at the moment. I haven't for maybe 2 years, really, any full ROM training. I'm convinced enough by the evidence that we have and how that would apply to the back muscles and my own personal biofeedback that that's a good and smart decision. And I think I slowly got to this point. Like it's not been that I suddenly switched my whole program to lengthened partials and I've experimented with it here or there. But I think a really good point you're making is people throwing out their personal feedback and their personal experience in favor of what they're seeing somewhere else. And actually, I've had this with a few clients over the last few weeks where they've seen some people in our space talk about maybe technique on an exercise and how they like to do it. And then they've completely modified their technique to do it a different way. And I'm like, was the way you were doing it before feeling productive, like really good? And does this new technique feel better to you or just different? And they're like, very often it's just like, it's just different. Maybe doesn't quite feel as good because it's new. And I'm like, why would you throw out what you're already doing, which is clearly very productive, for something completely new, just randomly haphazard? And my biggest worry is that they do that often. So it's the same if a new research paper comes out, suddenly they switch everything in their program to be that way. It's like, but that's just, it should only move the needle ever so slightly in a direction, like with the lengthened partial or the research that's coming out on range of motion as it pertains to hypertrophy. It's just moving us more and more in the confidence that the lengthened range is very productive. Like, it's not saying everything now needs to be that way. It's the same with like volume literature. Yeah, I mean, it seems to be there's more research building that there's a dose response to volume, but don't suddenly switch your 10 sets of quads per week to whatever, 52 sets, right, at the peak growth and volumes. It's like, that would just be completely crazy, to like give an extreme example.
Yeah. And sometimes I'm always bringing examples of like investing and also trading and all that kind of stuff. And this is once again one of those things. If you want to be a profitable trader, you want to find your system, and the system can look quite different to other people and how you interpret the market. And you should then, once you follow your system, be quite emotionally detached from it, independent of what other people surrounding you or in your environment do and tell you to do. For example, right? Because they may have a different system, they have maybe a different time frame, different profile in itself, right? And it can only throw you off when you're starting then to question things, even though that your system has been profitable and working. And it's kind of the same applying to training. If your training has been quite productive, you've been doing this for long enough so that you have back tested your system, so you know it's working for you, it results in great productive growth overall. You don't need to then immediately question yourself and try to apply a different system or so just because that other person says like, oh no, I think that the market is actually now topping here and it's going down, but your system tells you actually it's going further up. And now all of a sudden you throw over your entire system that you have built and back tested for like maybe ages already, just because someone else is telling you like, oh no, you need to do XYZ now because I think this is what's actually going on.
Yeah, I think people, and it's taken me a while, but you need to just grow confidence in your system. Like you're saying there, like be confident in what you're doing. Like, and if you're not confident, question why you're not confident. Is it because you don't actually have a good program, or you don't really know what you're doing? And I think sometimes I find myself doing that for clients, at least. You're probably the same, Pascal, where it's like you just give them a ton of confidence that they know what they're doing in the gym is just so productive.
Yeah.
And sometimes that is really what people need, where they just need to calm that self-doubt that they're constantly not quote unquote being optimal, whatever, like, you know, according to the research that keeps coming out, and I got to reduce my rest times, or I'm resting too much. You know, that rest time paper came out recently. It's just like don't let it. It should just add to your body of literature. It shouldn't suddenly cause your mind to just completely warp. So yeah, I think that's a good point.
Also there, you can of course listen and then maybe check back your system, how this aligns within the claims the other person is making, and whether it has even some place in your system to be incorporated with. But such as with you and the lengthened partials, it's not that you've all of a sudden thrown out all of the things. It was, as you mentioned earlier, a gradual process that happened in the background, where then more and more evidence has been presented to you that it is actually a positive thing, and then it's probably also then applying to other movements overall.
Yeah, I think this is the problem with social media, isn't it? Because it is that like little digestible pieces of information, and people just grab upon stuff, and that's often what is also rewarded by the algorithm. So then the more outlandish, the more like kind of attention grabbing it can sound, the better it performs. But it could lead people quite astray in many instances, and they need to listen to more long format conversations where you can dive into nuance and discussion and give proper recommendations. But I don't think there's anything else interesting going on my end apart from the diet break is now happening, which is, and it's actually funny, Cliff messaged me and I was just like, the immediate thought that came into my head was like, no, I don't want a diet break. But also, just because that's your typical, just like, you just want to keep going, right? I'm running, things are running nicely. But I was like, actually, on reflection, I'd already been thinking, hey, I'm getting close to stage. I don't want to burn out. It's the perfect time. Things have been smooth. Let's just hold ship. So I think it's going to be I think it was a great time to have incorporated that.
Absolutely. I think it's also a good place to then end the show. On that note, though, because we are always talking about something else at the very tail end of things, at the beginning and also the very tail end of things, how do you find the last 2 episodes of Demon Slayer?
These are just them training, right? And it's just whipping those jacked, like Harish, not Harish. What they called what they called the guys who are getting trained? I don't even know. The little soldiers.
The Demon Slayer corpse.
That's the one. Yeah, Demon Slayer corpse. Yeah, they're just so jacked. And Hanjiro, when he takes his top off,
everyone is just like has the
fucking
perfect
Ronnie
physique.
Coleman. Yeah. As soon as that happened, I was almost going to do a story about it on my Instagram, just feeling like this is just typical anime for you, where this child is just jacked out of his mind, doing no training, just running apparently. But I enjoyed them. I really appreciate, I don't know why, but the animation on Demon Slayer in particular, I just really like how they do the faces and everything. And I'm excited for where that's going to go. I think
also
it's going to
get... fight scenes. They're always kind of... So I didn't really like the last season that much, where they were in the Swordsmith Village arc. I think it was, right? It was too much CGI, especially with the tree dragon or what it was supposed to be.
Yeah.
Too much CGI. Same goes for the vessels, those kind of fishy objects with a vessel on top. Was also too much CGI for my taste. But the fight scenes, especially also here in this season, not many fight scenes have happened so far. But like in the last episode, everything was cloudy. You just saw the colors of the different Hashira fighting against each other. It looked cool, right? But the last 2 episodes, man, it was just kind of filler episodes, and it was just
nothing really happened.
It was kind of annoying me to the point, because the previous episode was already kind of a filler episode, and this one, once again, I was just like, man, come on. I thought the day and age of filler episodes is over.
It's funny, obviously the guys were jacked, but then I've forgotten his name, the flashy Harisha, who has an eye patch now. Do you know his name? I can't remember his name. Tengen, that's the one. His wives, he has 3 wives or whatever, and then they all have gigantic breasts and just like ridiculous physiques. It's just hilarious, just like typical anime.
But he is a handsome dude. He is a handsome dude. So I can understand it.
And then I was like, man, if he is this good still, because he was really fighting well and like incredibly strong, I was like, you should probably still be in on the action, man. If you're that good. Rather than all these little,
but he is supposed and was supposed to be the weakest Hashira of them all.
Interesting.
You a lot, man. Tells you a lot.
Weakest from not strength, but from overall power,
kind of, right? Yeah, exactly. So the power ranking. So the stone Hashira is the strongest of them all. Just
which is the stone? Is he the guy who cries?
The names, always the names. The one with who's always praying.
Yeah. I assumed he was the strongest. Yeah, I didn't know it was the stone. And those other 2 Hashira are going to fight. So that should be good.
Yeah. So, man, I'm always forgetting the names. So normally I'm not bad with names, but when it comes to animes and then chatting, this is where I'm then always losing the names. When I always, for example, with you, Steve, when I'm chatting, I'm just like, what's the name again?
I can picture them, but I can't remember their specific. Japanese names sometimes are hard to remember.
That's true.
They're a bit random sometimes for us, English or European.
Shina Zigawa or something like that. Is it the Wind Hashira? Something like that. I think. It doesn't really matter.
No, we're all good. Nice. Yeah, I watched that, and what's it called? My Hero Academia. I watched the next episode of that, which I enjoyed, and I'm excited now for I guess it's like the war arc or whatever it's going to be. It caught me out by surprise what happened. I was quite, that was enjoyable.
I'm still kind of, when it comes to the drawing style of My Hero Academia, for me, it doesn't reflect the seriousness of the show itself. It is very kind of soft and childishly looking.
Yeah.
A little bit too unserious. I don't know how else to phrase it, but I guess you know what it is that I'm talking about, which doesn't really align with the sentiment of the show, which is unfortunate, because I think if they had a different drawing style, which is of course a very, very much invalid criticism, because that's just the manga, the way that he's drawing, but at the same time, I think it would have a very different touch to it.
Yeah, I agree.
Because the story is pretty cool. And pretty serious, by the way.
Yeah, it definitely is. And so I'm looking forward to the rest of that. But no other random updates.
Cool. Then let's end it here. Leave the people with our discussion surrounding. I think it was a good episode, though, that many people can maybe even resonate with. Some questions, the discussions that we had. Different takes on nutrition, different takes on lengthened partials, maybe, where then the people can chime in the comment section and take side with one or the other. Yeah.
I was going to say they can comment nuts.
Not
Thank
that
you guys
our
for
video is
listening.
being blocked by that.
Spam nuts.
Losing weight fast while maintaining muscle mass. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? It isn't though. It's reality, and we know how to do it, and we will help you achieve this. The Minicut Movement is an 8-week fat loss program to make you lose a huge chunk of fat while maintaining muscle mass at the same time. We will support you from the beginning to the end so that you see the results you would like to and come out of it much stronger. You'll receive a fully automated spreadsheet that is based on your nutritional needs. You can choose between 6 different male and female training templates. Over 30 videos will guide you through each and every single step of the Minicut so that you're getting the most out of your journey and that you always know what to do. But the best thing is that you can start whenever you want. The Minicut Movement is open 24/7. So if you want to learn more or you're ready to sign up, hit the link in the description below. So let's revive stronger together.